Is lying about what a steward said a finable offence if it includes swearing? Do you have the strategic planning of Sergio Perez to play chicken with your boss? Welcome to Tinfoil Helmets, your occasional spicy hot take roundup of the latest F1 rumours, all with almost believable conspiracy theories to back them up. Everything here is carefully researched for hours to make sure it is totally founded in logic, reason, and truth. Or not! Who knows? Have we got anything right, Andrew? Have our predictions reached a crescendo to create us as the greatest F1 baseball player of all time?
If anything, we've hit the resolution to where nothing really exciting has happened, and we had bad predictions for this week. We had hopium predictions. We predicted what we wanted to happen, yes, but not what actually happened.
But remember, we're not trying to predict what we think really will happen. We're trying to think what's interesting and may happen. So first off was my brilliant, insightful, perfect, amazing, fantastic, unquestionably brilliant prediction that Ferrari were going to win the championship through no fault of their own. Instead, they lost it through every fault of their own.
I think that's a little bit harsh. They did try. They did battle back. Charles got all the way up to third from a last row start. They tried.
But
kind of.
They gave him a 10-place grid penalty because his battery was broken, which they could have done better with.
At that point, they should have just slapped a whole new power unit in and chucked it to 11 and said, what can this thing really do? It's got to do one race.
Yeah. But sadly, they thought he was going to qualify better, and he didn't.
He did get a little caught out there.
I also predicted that Charles was going to get P2 in the championship, and no, because it seems like Lando was on a steamer, so... So what does this take our batting average to?
I didn't calculate it, but if for anybody is, but for over the course of the season, we had 109 different predictions, and we got 34 right.
Perfect. So not criminal, but not great.
So that means of our 109 hopium wishes that we wanted to see in a race weekend, we got 34 of them.
Yeah, some of those were less hopey than others. Some of them were absolutely insane. So I think it's pretty good.
And some of them, including the sphere mocking a driver, came true.
Oh, that was so beautiful. I love that.
Is that the prediction? Is that the prediction of the season?
I think so, because it was both a prediction that was wrong, but also 100% right. And especially with the way in which it happened.
Yeah.
Yes. So this was a week between races, which usually means nothing happens. But as always, Formula One tries to deliver yet again. We will kick this off with the really frustrating ones, which is that the head honcho, MBS, the non-alleged murdery one, at the FIA says that drivers should just drive cars and they should have no opinion. And this is after last week's letter where the drivers were like, yo, you should show us a bit more respect.
He is murdering some people's careers at the FIA.
Yes, he seems to have cleaned house by getting rid of everybody. I will say that this occurred to me as I was writing this note up, that constantly we hear the barrage of no politics in sport, whatever. But the fact that MBS keeps commenting and making decisions and apparently trying to push his finger on a bunch of scales, that's putting politics into sport. Maybe he should stop doing that. Surprise. Do you want to talk more about this one? Do you have more feelings?
Oh, just briefly, did you see why the FIA said they didn't decide to throw a safety car when there was a mirror sitting in the middle of the braking zone?
No, I didn't.
So because it was a small piece of debris that they didn't consider worthy of having a safety car, even though it was in the braking zone and really only overtaking area on the whole track, because it was a small piece of debris, it was not worth throwing a full safety car for. And there was no meaningful gap to put to have a marshal run out doing a VSC. How big is Valtteri ran over it?
How big is big? Because if that's small, the big must be the size of a car.
I do agree with them that it was a small piece of debris, because we've seen chunks of like wings and stuff that hang out on the side of a track before that are about that size. It is a small piece of debris. However, I think the extenuating circumstances in this bit was that small piece of debris had the ability to become a bunch of really sharp, bigger or smaller pieces of debris, given that there's a chunk of glass sitting there, because I assume they're using glass in their mirrors or something. And then also, by the nature of where it was, the small piece of debris could become very consequential, especially given that, if it was just a straight piece of carbon fiber, it might have been fine if Valtteri ran over it. But given what the nature of what it was definitely we should have really stopped and picked that up. But they doubled down and said, nope, we did everything right.
And the fact that they say it was not on the racing line shows that the FIA doesn't believe that overtaking is part of the sport. Because overtaking is racing.
It's fair enough. And also that every penalty that was given out in Qatar had a precedent since 2020.
Including the stop-go penalties?
Including the stop-go penalty for Lando Norris. Because there was, if we think back to, I believe it was the Austrian Grand Prix in 2021, there were two drivers who ignored double wave yellow flags, but they were given a 30-second penalty in lieu of a 10-second stop-go after the race had ended. So that is why, like, we've kind of collectively forgot about it, because that penalty was not given during the race, it was given after the race. So that's why we're like, oh, how weird to see a car do a 10-second stop-go penalty. There were two drivers that were given a 10-second stop-go penalty, but because they had finished the race, because they investigated after the race, it was converted into a 30-second penalty.
Our memories are short as fans, are they not?
They are.
Speaking of short memories and fans, they got rid of Esteban Ocon, and we forgot about it because he's now not driving in the race because we got Jack Doohan instead.
Without telling him.
Without telling him?
He was not under the impression that he would not be racing Abu Dhabi. He posted something along the lines of like, I am really bummed because I had every expectation I was going to be racing in Abu Dhabi, as evidenced by his appearance at the driver's dinner.
I think that this is showing historically that if you are an Alpine driver, this is what you should expect. Because not only did they do it to Ocon, they kind of did it to Otmar when he got fired from Alpine. So they just fired him on the day and he didn't know. But more importantly, when Jolene Palmer was replaced at Renault back in 2016 or 2015, I can't remember what it was, he found out because the press told him that he wasn't going to be racing in the next race, and the team didn't tell him until they got to the track.
Yeah, this and then also, don't forget about the whole Oscar Piastri drama.
Oh, yeah.
Because the reality was, like, they didn't even make sure the contract was signed. It's very much the Office Space of we fix the glitch. We just find these things have a way of working themselves out on their own, and we like to avoid conflict.
Yeah, by creating more conflict.
Right.
Anyway, other big news. Zandvoort, actually, what I think, to be brutally honest, is actually one of my favourite tracks to observe. It may not produce the best racing, but it's a fun track to watch.
It's got a good loopy.
It's got a good loopy and a banky and a lefty-righty and a roundy, and It's great, and it's got the fans there, and it's great. But 2026 will be the last year it's going to be on the calendar, and it's going to get rid of it again, which I don't really understand because they just redid it and just got it back on the calendar, and now they're not. But I think this says something very important. It clearly means that the Dutch motor racing fraternity know that Max won't be there in 2027.
Yeah, his contract with Red Bull goes through like 26, doesn't
28.
it? 28. Okay.
28. So I think that's phoning it home. But I'm kind of sad that it's going to be going. It'd be interesting to see who replaces it.
And then meanwhile, Lando said that Max could save the Grand Prix because he has the $40 million. And he's like, it's not worth the money.
I didn't see that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Lando's like, Max could fund it. Max is like, yeah, that's not worth the money. yes, I have the money to do that. That is not a good use of money.
Because if Max isn't on the calendar, the track won't be worth it. So
yeah.
But
it also does give a little bit of insight into the cost of putting on a Formula One race to somebody who has the $40 million to do it is like, no, this is not going to return me money on my investment.
I do reflect sometimes, as I recently made my way through all the races in the past, that in the 2020, of course, there were no spectators at almost any of the tracks. And in hindsight, they must have paid a surprising amount of money to host those races. And I'd love to know the financials of how they made that work.
It just kind of reminds me of the old adage of, do you know how you make $1 million running a bike shop? Start with $2 million.
Start with $2 million.
Yeah.
Like, how do you make $1 billion with a Formula One team? Start with $2 billion.
Yeah, pretty much.
Speaking of Max, he and his bae, Kelly Piquet, have announced that they are having a mini Max, which they announced as the Verstappen Piquet baby. And they announced that right as the weekend started. I think that this is fascinating and very interesting because Max had previously said he didn't want to have kids until he'd retired. He is not yet retired as of recording on Sunday morning, but we don't know what might yet happen. I think this is the greatest chance, at least for the next year and a half, maybe 2 years, for anybody to beat Max, because I think he's going to be distracted.
I think he still stands a chance in 2025. Speaking a little bit from my own experience, but I think 2026 might be a little harder. It depends exactly when the kid is born to see how this all goes about. But also, Max has $1 bajillion and lives in a country that has good spousal or parental support.
Does Monaco have good parental support?
I would have to imagine it does.
Okay, I'd assume it's because it doesn't have any tax.
At least in the standpoint of you can hire a bunch of people.
Very true.
For the people who live in Monaco. I would like to chime in here from I have there is a group of friends outside of you who I chat with F1 with are effectively our F1 dad chat is what it's called. Yeah, it's fantastic. There were two things that we would like to point out. Number one, Max already referring to himself as a bonus dad with Penelope.
I thought that was great. That was great.
We loved it. Yeah. He's like, I'm a bit of a bonus dad. Now I get to be a real dad. He's pretty happy about that. He seems really jazzed. And then the other thing that we absolutely loved and is definitely worth calling out is the paddock hearing the news of a PK Verstappen child is all up in arms of like, oh, is this going to be the next great racing prodigy of all time, going to break every racing record? And when asked this question, Max said, I hope not. If he or she wants to do it, I could see that there's talent. I would support it, of course, naturally. But I really hope not.
Yeah, I love this. I thought this was a great quote. Basically, because it straddled that line perfectly between if the kid wants to do it, the kid can do it. But, maybe there are better things in life than driving around on a racetrack and traveling everywhere.
And also, like, the gist is that kid, when coming from, like, that sort of financial background of, because Max is set for life, the PKs do pretty well for themselves. Like, that kid can do whatever they want. They don't need to be a racing car driver.
So London School of Economics it is?
Sure. I'm going to go, if we're going to make predictions this early, I'm going to go Eurovision Song Contest winner.
I think that is very possible. Oh, to top it all off, it will be because Brazil is allowed into the Eurovision Song Contest. Given that large numbers of countries that are not part of the EU or the continent of Europe do regularly partake in the Eurovision Song Contest.
Like England?
That is part of the continent of Europe.
Is it, though?
Yes, it is. It's on the same...
There's a bit of water there between...
It's very shallow and it's the same continental plate, so...
So does that mean that if Iceland has an entrant, they have to come from the west or eastern half of Iceland when they're on the European continent, not the American continent?
Yes. For readers who are interested in performing lookups on Wikipedia and would like to write into feedback, if you could tell us where the participants and performers from Iceland have participated in the Eurovision Song Contest, which side of the continental plate they've come from, that would be great. But I would like one last point to prove that it doesn't really matter. Australia took part this year.
Yeah, fair enough. And if you do ever get a chance to visit Iceland, I strongly recommend going to where you can see the North American and European plates pulling themselves apart. It is quite a sight.
Now I need them to have a steak restaurant right on that continental divide, and one side of your plate comes with a giant steak on it, and the other side comes with some like small pile of very beautifully performed vegetables.
There's actually a bit of I assume given it's Iceland you have to go during the summertime, but there's actually a bit where you can snorkel between the continental plates.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it is. Have you been?
No.
It is very cool because you're standing essentially down this rift. And, like, you realize, oh, yeah, there's definitely, like, it just looks like a rift. And then you suddenly realize, like, oh, that's Europe and that's America. Like, you can just kind of tell suddenly that it's like, oh, this is not where I want to hang out long term, given that there are two tectonic plates.
Because at any moment they could come smashing together.
I think they're moving apart.
But this is tectonic plates. We don't know exactly how...
They could go anywhere.
Anything could happen. So, yes. My last parting point on the Eurovision Song Contest future for the Verstappen... PK baby is that we have to...
This is how you know the race was because we're talking about where to vacation in Iceland and the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah, I still dispute it wasn't shit, but we'll see where we get to. But the last comment on this is a quote from Fernando Alonso that he made in the car or post after the car, because he overtook and shot down the inside of Schumi, and he said that he only got past because he knew that Schumi would break sooner because he's got a wife and kid at home, and this is why it's the best chance for everybody else.
The only caveat I will make about that is that the cars of 2006 were kind of, I feel like, in that real crossover era of like the Senna somewhat unsafe drivers die all the time era, and our more modern Kevin Magnussen goes into the barriers into a fire. No, Roman Grosjean goes into the barriers in a fireball and walks out just fine. Like, Yeah, I'm not sure that's as much of a thing that works anymore, given the safety measure of the cars and how the drivers have been driving.
And I agree, and that's why the race was boring today. But
Hey, and then maybe I'm really torn between this being my favorite bit of between race drama and the next one being my favorite bit of between race drama, because this is just one line, but like everybody who I chat with Formula One about, we were all just like, what? And this is...
Well, hang on. Before you say it, I think if you are a Formula One follower, but not as close as maybe as we are, you should sit down to hear this groundbreaking revelation.
Sergio Perez wishes Red Bull should have tried harder in the Constructors' Championship.
I can't disagree.
What?
I can't disagree with this. This is so true. They should have tried harder by firing him.
Yeah, that maybe that's what he's actually saying is buy out my contract. If you really wanted to try harder in the Constructors' Championship, you should have bought out my contract. Yeah. Like, this is a guy who he never outscored Max on a weekend. I guess technically the only time he did outplace Max or outscore Max would be Australia when Max DNF'd. Right?
Yeah.
So he had 4 outside the points finishes, which seemed strikingly low, such that I'm going to go recheck that real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, he had 4 outside the points finishes and 4 retirements. Man. And since the summer break, he has scored a grand total of 20 points. And in my favorite bit of like random how ass is Sergio Perez trivia for this season is if you take the gap between every single pair of teammates and you add those gaps up, it is still not enough to equal the points gap between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez.
I just can't believe how badly this stat has gone. And I think it's you who first put this idea into the universe, and every day that passes, it becomes truer. But surely Sergio Perez is playing contract chicken with Red Bull. Like, it has to be at this point. Like, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in the race, but like what he did in the race this week and last week, which isn't very much, which is the point. He has to be waiting for them to fire him. And credit to...
Well, to be fair, that's a win-win for Checo, because if they keep him in the seat, he still gets to race in Formula One, which I guess is what he wants to do. And if they buy out his contract, they give him a cool $20 million. I mean, if I was sitting at my job going, you can either like give me $20 million or let me keep doing my job, I'm okay with either of these outcomes.
I concede that point. It should also be noted that Christian Horner has finally started to see the light, because he did say this week that it may have been, I think it was unwise or not the best choice, he didn't use the word mistake, to renew Sergio Perez in the middle of the season. You don't say, Christian. I can't believe this. I've got one more spicy take for this and spicy take and rumours. But let's move on to the other hilarious spiciness that happened this week.
So if we think back to Qatar, Max was pretty irate at George for essentially sobbing in the steward's room about how unfair it was. By the way, did you ever... I think I sent you the onboard video. Did you see the onboard video of the incident?
Yes.
To go back to Qatar real quick, it is... If you can go find it, I recommend going to find it, because George is moving very fast on a cool down lap, or on a warm-up lap, because they're warming up their tires before the final lap. His engineer tells him that Max Verstappen is ahead. Max is waiting, I believe, behind Fernando Alonso, kind of trying to, and he even said this of like, look, he didn't want to ruin anybody's lap or set anything up, so he was behind another car waiting for them to start their lap. And then George just runs up on the scene as fast as he can. Yes, Max was on the racing line. I'll give him that credit. But so many times we've seen drivers just like gentlemanly queue up before the final corner that like this is kind of what I believe everybody would have expected. But George rocks up really hard, makes it past Max, and then immediately slows down to set up for his lap.
On top of that, George saw two corners ahead where Max was. Because it wasn't his fast lap, he was maybe prepping it. He had the opportunity to take a slightly different line and not have to do anything special. But no, he intentionally turns into the spicy driving line.
Anyway, going into this weekend, George went on a massive tirade about how unsafe Max is and how Max crashes people and, citing Max pushing Esteban Ocon in Brazil when he was crashed trying to unlap himself in 2021. He made a comment. Of course, he brought Abu Dhabi 2021 into it, that if it had been the other way around, Max would have, done something stupid. He said that Max said he was going to put him into a wall, which by all intents and accounts,
it wasn't quite that.
Max never said.
He claims that he said he would put him in the fucking wall. Let's be clear, there was swearing.
I was trying to keep our podcast more family-friendly for all the non-families.
And I will beep this out. But it's important because you should note that anytime you swear when you're talking to the press, you're supposed to get a fine. And did George get a fine this weekend for swearing? He did not.
No, that is a very valid point, which we don't think Max said. And also, we kind of postulated last week that George is a very two-faced driver if he presents himself in a certain way to the public and to the media. And I would just like to remind everybody of Imola in 2021, where he clipped Valtteri Bottas trying to pass him in the wet. Both the cars crashed, and in the immediate aftermath of a crash, Valtteri was in the Mercedes at this point in time, when you don't know the state of the driver and how hurt they might be, he walked up to Valtteri Bottas' car and smacked him in the head. You don't know if Valtteri has a neck injury. You don't know what kind of injuries he might have because he had not gotten out of the car. So I just want to remind people of when George is ranting about how unsafe Max is, that George is not a poster boy for anything good.
Yeah, and he flipped him off as well at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes, this was terrible.
And then on top of all this, George also made a statement that Max was swearing in the steward's room. And in the closest I have ever heard of a Sky Sports person speaking out against a British driver, Ted Kravitz would like everybody to know that there are no reports or swearing allowed in the steward's room.
I think this says that George has lost the support of the Sky Sports team, which means he's only on a downward slope.
Yeah. And then, because all the drivers have an amazing sense of humor, at the big driver dinner at the end of the year, as they all filtered in, they left one chair open next to Max. And because George arrived last, because of course George is going to arrive last, he refused to sit next to Max and moved the chair.
The worst part about this is the fact that I'm pretty sure Max would have been fine about it. It's George that decided to make it a problem.
Yeah.
Because you can't be an adult and have a conversation and sit down. It's terrible. This is ridiculous. I don't mind it when drivers begrudge each other and they have rivalries, but there's a point where you start calling names that I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is silly. Even Lewis in 2021, where he felt pretty strongly about some of Max's behavior, didn't resort to calling him names.
Well, and even Max the other way around about Lewis. You think Silverstone 2021, they seem to keep it reasonably professional. There was also, I forget what the thing was you sent about George to me last week. I'm going to scroll through our chat to see if I could find it real quick. Because I think this is worth calling out. Because I looked up a bunch of very fun Lewis Hamilton facts to impress you mostly. So you sent me something where after the guitar, George was talking about who maybe would have thought that a young kid coming from Williams would have beat Lewis Hamilton in his first year of a teammate. It's like, do you think Kimi Antonelli has the potential to put you under pressure? I mean, if you're in a top-tier seat, he wouldn't put him under pressure. I don't think Toto would have given him that role in the first place. Lewis came off the back of winning 6 of 7 out of the row, and who would have thought that a young kid coming in from Williams would have beaten Lewis Hamilton in his first year as a teammate? So that is George's thoughts of himself.
You got to big yourself up occasionally.
Yeah, and I would like to point out that this weekend also had Nico Rosberg doing some commentary and also continuing to prop up Lewis to prop up himself. But just to give a good comparison of George and Lewis, if George had George doesn't even have as many wins of half as Lewis's championships.
That's a good stat.
Right? If George had as many wins as Lewis had championships, he would have 4 more wins. Essentially the same stat. If George had 1 more podium in his career, he would equal Lewis Hamilton's 2014. If George gets 1 more podium, which he did not do today, then he has the same amount of podiums that Lewis has once scored consecutively. That is 16, by the way. If George gets 2 more podiums, he has as many podiums as Lewis had in 2015, and 2016, and 2018, and 2019, and 2021.
I am just checking the stats. So how many wins does George have right now?
3.
In Lewis's first season in Formula One, he had more wins than George has in total after however many years. He had 4. He had 4 in his first season at McLaren in the first year.
I think we do have to put a little asterisk there of Lewis did essentially a full season of running in the McLaren and testing ahead of the 2007 season. But you are correct.
Sure, and you were also up against, and I know it's debatable, he was up against Fernando Alonso in his first year. And George had 4 years learning F1. That's probably just as much testing time. And he had time in the Mercedes. I mean, and I know the Mercedes is not, was not great in 2022, but really.
And going into Abu Dhabi this year, George and Lewis were tied on points scored at Mercedes while they have been teammates. Because Lewis Hamilton beat George Russell in today's race, Lewis has scored more points than George Russell did over the lifetime of their teammateship.
Perfect. Shall we move on to quali recap? Because we don't have any people who might have still jobs, so it officially becomes an occasional segment.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, quali. What did happen? Oh yeah, there was some reasonable pace. People were driving around. McLaren had the pace, but Ferrari didn't really at the end.
Max had some good pace there until he went sideways in Q3 on his last lap.
Yeah,
but I don't think he was going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I feel like he was driving pretty well in the first 2 sessions, but in the third one, I don't think he actually had the pace, even though he good recovery. Side comment about Max, his ability to recover from a whoopsie, like in terms of track control, is amazing. He did it again today, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Charles not only had a 10 race bid penalty because his battery went bang, he also managed to completely whiff his qualifying.
Yeah.
It was so bad. I felt bad for him, but he's getting ready for next year so that he and Lewis can, trade off when they whiff qualifying. Haas, I think, is probably the most interesting story because they kind of had an absolutely messed up quali. The Hulk actually qualified P4. He did really well. It was all on merit. But because apparently he rushed out the pit lane by driving around somebody in the tunnel, he got a 5 race bid penalty and ended up in P7.
Yeah, I don't think Max did it through the tunnel.
No, but the video is basically he was going into the tunnel by overtaking somebody.
I think that's the difference is because it's the tunnel. By the way, the tunnel is the only thing I like about the whole Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I love the tunnel.
I'm going to say something. It's maybe not racing. I do like the look of the hotel. I think it's quite fun, but it doesn't help the racing.
Oh, yeah. Yes, the hotel. Yes, the hotel looks great, but it ruins the racetrack because you put a race. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the contemporary at Walt Disney World in Florida where they have the monorail going through it. It's like, oh look, we've put a racetrack through your hotel.
I see. Yes, I can see it being very similar to that. And then continuing on the theme of Haas making a messed up quali, they ruined Lewis Hamilton's quali lap because K-Mag hit a bollard. To be fair, credit to K-Mag, he was getting out of the way as much as he could possible to stay off the racing line. But as he came back onto the track, he hit the bollard, knocking it straight in front of Lewis, where on his last 5 corners, got stuck under his car, took out all his downforce and kind of screwed him. And so he got knocked out in Q1, which kind of sucks.
Boo for Lewis.
Boo for Lewis. Shall we move on to the race?
Yeah, I don't think anything really happened. Leclerc didn't have to start last because of Colapinto's gearbox issues.
Oh yeah, both him and Albon had gearboxes because their gearboxes were bad damaged from smashing into the wall 16 times this year.
So we had all McLaren front row. We had Sainz and Max right behind them, ready to go.
Yep, it was beautiful. It was just an opportunity for everything to be absolutely perfect. And then Max tries really too hard in actuality. And punts Piastri off the track.
I slightly... Okay, yeah, Max was definitely in the wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say Max is right. But it just kind of preview a little bit later. This move, for me, made Max my driver of the day. Because without this move, we had 2 McLarens in the 1-2. We had the Ferraris way far behind. There was no way we were going to get a Constructor Championship battle. Max, a man of the people, knowing the sport needs something, dove it up the inside, maybe a little unwise, spun Piastri all the way around. He goes to the back, hits Colapinto as he's coming back up through the field, gets a 10-second penalty, takes one of the McLarens pretty much out of the points and out of the constructors race. So Max was doing his best to give everybody a show, because if Max doesn't do that, we have two McLarens just running off into the distance, and we really don't have any sort of hope that the race is going to be interesting.
My spicy take on this is that he did it on purpose. Not because he had anything against Piastri, but because his only real BFF on track, like the real deep down BFF, is Charles, and he knew that if he did this, it gave Charles the chance to be the one and only time he'll clinch a championship.
Exactly. Maybe not one and only time, but at least for something for the time now.
Yeah.
Martin Brundle really did not like it. He's like, this isn't your fight. You've already won your driver's title. You should just stay out of the way, sort of thing. And it's like...
but also really...
But also, Martin, you obviously don't hate to lose like Max does. And if you hated to lose, you would have won a race.
Oh, spicy. I will say, I agree that Max should have got the penalty because he got a 10-second penalty for this.
Yeah, he absolutely should have.
The only thing I'll say is I don't think he was doing his normal thing. I think he actually understeered. If you watch it, he's basically not really in full control versus his normal thing of like, I'm just going to open the wheel. He just slid into him. So
the one thing that I do think is a bit odd about this whole season, lap 1, turn 1 incidents have been kind of like a stewards see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. And they actually decided to see some evil today.
Yes, because British bias.
Sure. Or because they knew it didn't actually affect anything.
True. Also, I do think that really plays heavy on them sometimes.
It's easy to give a penalty when you know that nothing will result in the penalty. If anything, they saved Max a couple dollars on his super license for next year.
Oh, good point. Interesting. Yes, because he needs to save some money because he's got a kid coming and the college is expensive.
Yeah. For those of you that don't know, how much you pay for your super license points is how much essentially... There's a factor of like you pay an extra $1 for like however many points you scored.
It's not literally $1. There's a lot more than that, but it is a ratio of dollars to points.
So congrats on free super license to Valtteri Bottas, Logan Sargent, and Jack Doohan.
Why do they get a free one?
Because they have no points.
Oh, I see.
I know there's a base fee there. It's like $2,000 or something like that, but essentially it's a free super license because you scored no points.
Poor Valtteri. Speaking of people who finished the race before the race was really going. Should we talk about... I don't want to talk about Perez because we could talk for hours about him. But he got whacked by Bottas. And I think that was actually genuinely an accident. Bottas was trying to keep out of the way and very gently punted him, ever so slightly, just gently, and spun Perez round on the first lap. And then he seemed to get going again. But then within half a lap, he pulled the car over and got out of it. And gave us a VSC. I don't understand how the car was broken. Is the Red Bull made out of jelly? Is it glass?
Well, this is twice in 2 races that it seems Sergio has decided there's an issue with the car and he doesn't feel like driving. There is some debate of people who don't know Formula One, or maybe who do know Formula One, who watched Perez's onboard in Qatar, and it looks like he spun the car himself trying to heat some tires. And then said, "Oh yeah, it's broken. We can't go." Yeah, in Qatar and quit early.
It dumped all the power suddenly when we were least expecting it. I need someone to leak this, especially for the Abu Dhabi race, where I really can't believe anything broke on that car. At least nothing unrepairable. So that was ridiculous.
It looked like Perez did not feel like driving back through the field.
Yeah, it seemed like a bunch of effort, really. And then, speaking of drivers who were stuck at the back. Yuki absolutely mullered his start. It was so bad. He didn't jump it, but he lost it immediately after starting and then ended up actually legitimately in last place. But then by the end of lap 4, he was in P10 and nobody was talking about his zoom up the field. Admittedly, 4 people in front of him spun out and had a terrible mistake. But he did pretty good on that. And I thought, A, he did really bad, and B, he's definitely not getting the Red Bull seat.
Yeah.
And then, in a desperate, pining, yearning, hopeful return to contributing to McLaren's potential World Constructors title, after the VSC ended because Perez put his car on the side and didn't want to do it, Piastri overcooked it while trying to get a jump on everybody as part of the VSC ending and absolutely rear-ended Franco Colapinto, puncturing Franco Colapinto's car. And
giving himself a 10-second time penalty in the process.
Yeah, and that was pretty deserved. He kind of absolutely screwed that up. And then nothing happened for a really long time. And then kind of the most exciting thing was Lawson had a really bad time.
Yeah, I'm really upset about that because normally if you don't put a wheel on properly, the wheel then comes flying off on the racetrack and we get a full safety car because you can't move the car. And that could have really spiced things up. So V-carb mechanics, if you're going to not do your job, could you really do a better job of not doing your job, thus that we actually have something interesting happen?
They should whole-ass it because they half-assed it, meaning they put the nut on half as good as they needed to, and they just shouldn't have bothered. And he was actually giving it quite a lot of welly to try and get it round in time, so I was surprised it didn't shoot off.
Yeah. But Charles gave everybody a little bit of hope going from P19 to 11 on the first lap and then all the way up to 8th by the end of lap 4. He was on it. He was trying to be on it.
He had the pace, and I don't know whether it's because he had a magic battery that was working. It does really raise the question for me if he had actually, let's say, got P2 or P1 in terms of the fastest in Q3, whether he could have been in P10 and actually made a bigger difference here. So
yeah. So to me, this is just kind of sometimes my problem with Formula One in the first place is that everybody always just hangs onto the tires they need for the fastest strategy. They never think about like a bold strategy or something like this, because there was a situation in the race about 35, 38 laps to go. You had already been on the hard tire for 18 laps or so like that.
Right.
And there was and everybody was close enough that I think it would have been interesting to, and clearly we saw it somewhat worked for Lewis, of go ahead and pit Carlos and essentially know that Lando or Charles is not going to hold him up. And, immediately just let him pass it because I think he would have come out just a little bit behind that. And then that would force Lando, and this is when they were still about 2.5 seconds behind. This would force Lando and McLaren into an immediate decision of, do we chase down or do we cover off signs? But the interesting thing, because of where Charles was in the gap, if Charles would have really pushed it for 2 laps, if they would have planned and Charles pushed it for 2 laps, there's a really good chance that Lando comes out behind Charles. At which point Charles gets to be a rolling roadblock for as much as he can be to try to, because what's the worst case that happens is you both crash out. That's great because now you got Sainz leading the race and one McLaren way down the field and one McLaren way out, and your Ferrari way out in front to lead. So, be that rolling roadblock and slow Lando down to give Carlos a gap to try to hold off Lando. And we know that McLaren historically has not worked well this season in dirty air, seeing that Oscar did not do a good job of charging back through the field. So I'm really sitting here just Ferrari is not bold. No F1 team is bold on their strategy.
You are proposing that Formula One needs to learn a bit about economics theory. Specifically, they need to think about the Nash equilibrium. The idea being that everybody's always going for the fastest. They want to be the best. And actually what they need to do to create the best scenario for them is not just go for the best. They need to go for a different strategy that actually will cause other people to change their strategy. Because everybody is assumed to go to the best one. It causes crappiness for the rest of us.
Right. And there was, for some reason, this has popped up on my Instagram feed several times in the last couple of weeks, is the Spain, it's a recap of not really even a recap, but a behind the scenes from Mercedes of Spain 2021 of when Lewis was just stuck behind Max the whole point in time. And, essentially somebody calls up James or the chief of strategy and goes, hey, I'm starting to think we're looking good there's a strategy called two-stop that's looking pretty good, which, by the way, A+ name strategy on that Mercedes. And it's yeah, but you see the problem with the two-stop is it's gonna be in a bad spot. It's yes, but Max is going to have to push it. It involves heavily on Max's tires falling off the cliff. But if they went to a two-stop, then in order for Max to maintain the gap, he would have to push to a point of Max's tires fall off the gap. So they were, they did something different, and they called it late. They brought Lewis in for the two-stop. Lewis brought back a second a lap on Max and ended up winning the race. So, this is this case of you do see it occasionally of bold strategy paying off, but it is very much the exception in Formula One, not the rule. It's the kind of thing we talk about maybe once a season of somebody calling an absolute strategy blinder. And this is a case where I'm looking at Ferrari going, McLaren clearly has the pace. You're not going to get by on pace. It's time to do something else. And I don't think they ever leave enough tires in reserve to do something else. Because you could have chucked on a fresh medium with 18 laps to go. Ooh, that could have been good.
Or even if you had used mediums to just trigger confusion.
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing though. If you're McLaren And given that Ferrari's ability to call the most amazing, brilliant blinder strategies over the last 25 years, do you just look at whatever Ferrari's doing and be like, that's nice, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm going to do, because who knows what Ferrari's trying to do?
But you look at like Lewis in this race, which I think is the next thing we were going to talk about, is Lewis came all the way back down the grid and ended up passing George on the last lap on a one-stop strategy because George's tires were getting old and Lewis was able to close the gap and rock around George. So, I think that I don't know if it would have won Ferrari the Constructors' Championship, but I'm looking at this going, they would have had a shot. While if you maintain the status quo, you're hoping that Lando bins it or there's a weird safety car or something. Like, to me, the bold strategy that Formula One always looks out for is the random safety car. They don't look out for the extra stop.
You're saying that Ferrari could have created luck rather than hoping for luck.
Yes.
I agree. And I think it's interesting, as you mentioned, that, of course, Charles started behind Lewis, whether Charles should have started on the hards too, because I think he started on the mediums. And tried to pull the same strategy because that might have played off, especially if he could have still done 5 or 6 places on the first lap.
But I understand why but also given that you wanted Charles to drive through the field as quickly as possible, you don't want to start on the harder tire that then slows him down. So I could see both sides of that.
But it worked for Lewis because Lewis made up a lot of places in reality. And I think some of it on the first lap was really because other people spun off in front of him. But still, once he kept going, he kept whining like he does, put some mediums on, and then did a pretty good job of like really closing somewhere in the region of a second a lap at times on everybody else and getting past them. And there was this interesting observation back that George couldn't get past Gasly. No matter how much he tried, he just couldn't pull it off. And I have this theory that there's a lot of people who look at Lewis coming through and they are like, he's eventually going to get me anyway, just irrespective of whether it's Lewis or not. And then they say, but because it's Lewis, I have nothing to prove. I don't need to prove I'm better than Lewis because Lewis he has just so much context and history that clearly he's the, in inverted commas, better driver. Whereas when George is coming through, your career depends on looking like you can hold George back. And so he defends in a much more, maybe not aggressive is not the right word, but strategic way. And I feel that really helps Lewis a lot of times. I think it helped him in 2021 in Brazil because a lot of drivers were like, I'm not in this fight. I'm just going to let him go past. And it wasn't quite the same today, but I felt there was this definite tone of, it's Lewis. It's fine. I'm not going to look bad if he gets past me. And so it's okay. And he was doing really well with Bono bigging him up. You can get the podium, lad. Go on. Give it a bit of hammer time. And I was hopeful, but then there was a bit where I think George kind of woke up and gave it a bit more effort. And then it was like the halfway around the literal last lap, and there was a 5-second gap to make it up to Charles to get that podium, and that just wasn't going to happen.
Yep.
So... but as you said earlier, it ultimately makes him the winner in the teammate battle over the last 3 seasons, and I'm very happy for that. Last but not least on the race, Abu Dhabi thought it would pretend that it was Monza and try and make something exciting by building the podium out in the middle of the track, and it didn't work because to make that work, you really need the track to be invaded by everybody, and it didn't really work because nobody invaded. So, anything else on the race?
I'm good on the race.
Driver of the day / driver who couldn't wait for it to be over. My recommendation for driver of the day is Piastri because he didn't give it up. I feel like a lot of drivers would have been like whining on the radio and being blah, blah, blah. And he just he drove his race. Maybe he couldn't do as good a job as maybe he needed to do, but he got on with it and did a reasonable job. And I thought that was actually pretty good for him. I think for me, that's a good driver, irrespective of your skills, like putting your oar in and getting on with it rather than whining like a certain Lewis Hamilton does. And then my drive who couldn't wait for it to be over, quite literally, Sergio Perez, because he just gave it up after the first lap and a half. So, he's looking for that $20 million payout, but he's going to be driving next year. Anyway, Andrew?
My driver of the day, I said earlier, was Max for at least for causing a collision in turn 1 that led to at least somewhat of an interesting race, because I think it would have been a hell of a lot more boring if that hadn't happened. And I had actually an Oscar for my driver who couldn't wait for their day to be over because you got punted at the first corner and then trying to charge back through the field, you get a 10-second penalty. You end up scrounging a point, good for you. But you were on for a podium and now you're hoping to get 1 point. That's kind of a crap day. Yeah. I think Liam also had a pretty bad day of wanting it to be over. His car literally exploded at the end of the race.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, poor guy.
Which was off the racing line, too late for a safety car. Come on, bud. If you're going to blow up your car, do it properly.
Did you not get into the driver's room and everybody pulled the short straw to decide who was going to cause the safety car 5 laps before the end?
I think every year in Abu Dhabi, Nicholas Latifi needs to give the bottom 5 drivers the bottom 10 drivers in the standings a presentation of how to make Abu Dhabi an interesting race.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
he can use those economic skills.
Use those London business economic skills to come through together.
Championship watch. I'm only including this because McLaren did nail it in the end. First time in 26 years. I think it is important to be noted for the record that they would have got it probably at least once more if they hadn't cheated that 1 year and the FAA slapped them on the wrist very hard.
And just to fully go in on this, I would like to argue that if they hadn't cheated this year, they wouldn't have won it this year.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. Yes, that stupid flexi wing that they were told that they shouldn't have.
Which it's kind of normal F1 cheating, not bad F1 cheating.
Yeah. It's part. Yeah. It's don't hate the player, hate the game.
It's the development race, and it's everything is illegal till it's not illegal, or everything is legal till it's illegal.
Spicy takes and rumors.
So this is not our rumor, but it's definitely worth mentioning. So there's been a lot of chat between Qatar and Abu Dhabi about people already contracted to fill Red Bull seats. It's like Liam Lawson's moving up to the main team. There's an F2 driver whose name I don't fully know.
Isaac Hadjar.
Moving into the Racing Bull seat. And this is kind of because he had a press conference of like, do you have plans for next year? And it's like, well, I can't say anything because it hasn't been announced yet, which is like the most, yep, I have plans for next year. It's going to be great. So yeah, there's an interesting thing there of what does that mean? So the take there is that Checo is not the one leaving Red Bull. Max is the one leaving Red Bull because Kelly's pregnant and he wants to spend time with his family. And kind of my own take on this is I think Max knows the 2025 car might be short. I'm not entirely sure that's true, though, because they've kind of come back around the last couple of races and they'll have even more aero time than McLaren will have during the offseason. I don't think the world is as rosy for McLaren as they think it is. But Max might think the 2025 car is short, or at least not as dominant as it could be. And he does want to take some time with his family, and then he'll take 2025 and 2026 off, and in 2027 be back on the grid with the fastest team and whoever wants him.
So he takes 2 years to run a lighter schedule, but keep his fitness up and keep his skills up by sim racing, and maybe doing a bit of
maybe doing Le Mans.
Yeah, and some sports car racing. He can stay in Europe for a lot of that.
He did do that Le Mans test with Red Bull during when he was down at Vegas.
Exactly. So I think there's definitely something going on there. I will subscribe to this theory, and I think that it all piles in on the fact that when Kelly Piquet posted 2 months ago, maybe it was, that, life is sometimes you have to make a big choice, or life is going to change, or change is inevitable, or something along that. And everybody's like, what does this mean? Now we know what it means because they were having a baby. But I think it's actually because they're like, we've made the decision that Max is going to nope out at least for 2 years, and maybe he'll never come back. But maybe his plan is to come back in 2027. Maybe he's got Toto on the blower, come in Mercedes, maybe they'll have fixed it. But I think it's ridiculous. But I think related to this, despite the fact that I really want Sergio Perez to not be in F1 anymore, I think he's going to be on the grid in 2025, even if Max stays with the team. But certainly if Max leaves, and what they should be doing is firing Perez and getting someone brand new, or maybe from the Racing Bull team, into it. I'm still holding out for Bottas and a Red Bull.
And then the other thing is on Takes and Rumors is we postulated mid-season that Toto or that Mercedes was sabotaging Lewis Hamilton. And we got a little glimpse this weekend that might actually be true. So in talking about Lewis's qualifying, he said, we chose on the car to also experiment for next year, and we totally let him down. Kind of talking about the qualifying setup, but I think it also leads to a kind of overall thing of the year of they were using Lewis as an experiment, and Lewis's car as an experiment and not George's car. And thus Lewis was on a really bad strategy sometimes, or on a really bad setup sometimes, because they were trying to, because he's not going to be around for next year anyway, so we might as well use his car to confirm our suspicions or to try new things. So I think we're actually kind of right that Mercedes was sabotaging Lewis.
Yeah, and Lewis probably is the right driver to be giving the feedback, given that he's had more experience with the team, and maybe he's just really good at giving feedback, even though they ignored him in 2022. But such is life. I can subscribe to this theory. I think it's definitely possible. Remember, he spent a lot of time at the beginning of 2022 doing all the experimentation there because George needed some stability because, it was new to the team and needed some time and energy, despite the fact that he claims he beat him. So, yes, Terrible. Move on from spicy takes and rumors to our new section briefly at the very end of the season.
Let's do it.
Feedback from our readers. We had a tip-off with some local insight from somebody who's very familiar with the Las Vegas area about our suggestions about how we really needed to fix the track. There are a number of different opportunities here, and I didn't realize that there is so much unused road / interrelationships with all the different parts of the track. One of them is that big long straight on the back because it's very boring. Replace it with a tunnel. Dig a giant tunnel, slap some LEDs in it, reverse sphere, right? You could put it and it can go whoosh. You can have Sergio Perez putting his thumbs down the entire time while he's going along 1.5 miles of straight line. I think this is good, but probably too dangerous because you can't have a car going in a tunnel. But
it could look like Rainbow Road, which would be awesome.
It would be amazing. Then the other suggestion is apparently there's an old unused monorail track that they could put that's big enough that they could add on and put the Formula One track on it. I think this is a brilliant idea because I think it's the opportunity for Las Vegas to set up a rivalry with another track that we're not really sure should be on the grid, which is Saudi Arabia, who is building their own Rainbow Road lift-up kind of angled, like 100 feet up in the air where Lance Stroll is finally going to exit F1 because he's going to shoot off the corner. I think Las Vegas should do that. Las Vegas should invest in making that monorail the actual track for Formula One. I think that'd be brilliant. And then last but not least, there was a lot of suggestion that there is a lot of unused, well, not only unused, but freeway ramps between turns 4 and 10, including a big spaghetti thing. Anybody here from the United Kingdom would know about Spaghetti Junction. It's like that, but possibly bigger because everything's bigger in America.
You know, when I first saw that, I was like, but I-4 and I-10 do not go through Las Vegas. But between turns 4 and turns 10 makes a lot more sense.
Does make more sense. Yes, I-4 and I-10, yes.
It's like, no, it's 15 that goes through Vegas.
I think all of these, I don't think you would dispute. These seem like excellent plans. And we will make sure that if the FAA would like to contact us, we will connect you with our source.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, we don't have any predictions for the next race because there isn't a next race. But we'll be back soon, I guess, with the season recap. We made some season predictions at the start of the season. We were pretty much totally wrong, but we're going to be back to probably have a season wrap-up. There's probably going to be some news in the next week. It seems like some drivers are going to be confirmed or not confirmed.
Please.
So yeah, and you know, we got there's a rookie driver test on Tuesday.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, we got some things coming up. So probably next week or so, we'll have a season review. We'll give our driver assessments of the year and how well they did. We have 24 drivers to rate this year, and that's only off of 10 teams.
That's ridiculous. Too many people, Too many races.
So, once again, thank you for listening to Tinfoil Helmets this whole season. We are awaiting your feedback, so please write in at feedback@tinfoilhelmets.com and let us know your conspiracy theories, feedbacks, and wants. And also tell your friends to like, rate, listen, and subscribe.
Peace.
Later.
It will be on the record and used against you in a court of law.